So for my project this summer, I'm looking at how African American artists just see America and how they portrayed it over time. And so last session that I had, I did art pieces from about the 20s to, or the 40s, the 20s to the 40s, essentially. And so this time, I kind of wanted to focus on the 60s to the 80s, and just kind of the effects after like the civil rights movement and how that affected art and just America in general. And so these are the three art pieces that we'll be looking at today. So this first one is called Oh Freedom by Barbara Jones Hogu. And the medium this is on is a screen print, and it was made in 1971, and it is 22.5 by 30 inches big or long. And the style is, it has a few different styles, but the style that it was made during was the Black Power movement, which included the Black Arts movement, which happened in the 1970s. And so historically and culturally, the 70s were kind of filled with the Black Power movement, or at least for Black Americans, it was filled with the Black Power movement and kind of trying to attempt to racial pride and empowerment, like politically and economically, because although America had passed the Civil Rights Act in '65, there was still so much more to be done, and so much more, there's still so much racism that this was a time for Black artists and Black musicians and just Black Americans in general to stand up and kind of demand more respect. And so out of this larger movement came the Afro-Cobra, which is where Barbara, like the artist Barbara, she was a part of this bigger group, essentially, and it was the African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists. And so their 1970 manifesto advocated for the principles of social responsibility, grassroots artistic involvement, and promotion of Black pride. And she was actually a founding member of this group that was founded in Chicago in 1968. So the form and like what artistic elements went into creating a piece such as this. So this piece was made using screen print, which is where you essentially carve out different pieces into like a stencil, and then you pour paint over it, and it goes on the silk screen, and it kind of just soaks into the places where the stencil is. And because you use it, or you create a stencil when you're creating a piece like this, it's a lot easier to replicate more and more of these pieces, and thus it makes it a lot more accessible to the public and just people in general, because you can spread it easier. And usually prints are used as like a form of propaganda or ways to spread propaganda. And so for the Black Power movement, it was easier way to spread the movement's messages. And so the Black Power style was, they used a lot of high energy colors and experimented with kind of different rhythms and different energies, and adopted a lot of symbols that represented African roots. And so here you can see like the purple and the orange contrasting with each other, and then all of those colors on top kind of contrasting with the Black figures down at the bottom. Okay. Oh my gosh. So the subject matter of this piece was really just a call to arms for African Americans and white Americans, essentially everyone to kind of unite and continue to fight for change in America. Because like I said, although the civil rights movement happened in like the 60s, it still went far into the 70s and still had lasting impacts. And so they wanted to continue the fight and encourage it to keep going. And so in this piece, she uses like the strong silhouettes and bold colors, and uses them, that contrast, like I was saying, with the colors to make people really, like, to make the message of her piece really pop. And for this piece, it was unity and drawing people together. And so in this piece, all the figures are kind of differentiated with different facial expressions, but their body, they don't really have differentiated bodies, which shows that they're all kind of unified together, and it's all like a mass of people like coming together in that form of unity. And again, they're using the, the Black Power salute or the stiff fist. So it really works to create this sense of like solidarity and strength in this piece. And so the function, or what Barbara Jones Hogu was really trying to do by creating this piece, is that she wanted to create a piece that really invoked a meaningful response in people and called them together to unite and just called them to action. She knew, and I mean, everyone in this movement knew, that if there was more unity and more people acted together, it would be easier to demand more change and put more pressure on these institutions to get this change. And so, again, by using this screen print type of medium, she creates a much more accessible art that can be used to call people and used to be dispersed among different people around the country, essentially. And so the reactions, really, I want to focus on how people react to these pieces then and how we could kind of react to them now. And so this entire art Afrocopa collective was fueled by this desire to create racial pride while also encouraging radical change. And so it was surrounded by times of action with figures like Malcolm X demanding, that Black Americans stand up and advocating for Black nationalism and really just trying to empower and garner change. And prints like these kind of show people that this was a collective fight and helped fuel the passion that was like there. I mean, this movement was coursing through neighborhoods and whole towns, and especially in Chicago and New York, like it was really picking up speed. And so they wanted to create this kind of new era. And so this new era of like culture and art and style and just really embrace. And so I want to ask you guys now, and that's why I included, so the two pieces we have, the one on the top is the Unite piece that we were talking about. But the one on the bottom has been adopted as kind of a figurehead, I guess, for the Black Lives Matter movement and just representing, and people have, sprayed it on their posters or put it on t-shirts and just really used it to spread this message. And so I wanted to just ask you guys, do you think that prints like these have made a comeback or could make a comeback in forms like this print down at the bottom, or just in general in reference to like the Black Lives Matter movement that is happening now? So, and so you guys are, we'll go through these two questions right now. So if anyone wants to talk, you're welcome to, and I'll put the question in the chat as well.
Yeah, Lauren, I think that these prints can definitely, I don't think they've ever left. I think they've always been, I think they're much more widespread now. It's sort of like thinking about Bob Marley. There are people who've been following Bob Marley forever. And then there are, or Che Guevara, or, there are these iconic figures, symbols that have always been part of the movement, particularly for those who study it, who who embody it or who are activists themselves. But I think that there are moments like the one that we're in now, where they become a lot more widespread, you know. So like everybody will throw on a T-shirt with Bob Marley's face on it, you know, but that wasn't always the case. And I think that it's similar for this emblem as a representation of a much longer struggle.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I also really like your second question about like the possibility of the ways we use tech being a new kind of art and being a new method of sharing art and whatnot. And so some of my own research like focuses on social media and information exchange in that way. And I absolutely think that like imagery on social media and when it comes to movements and whatnot, like I remember hearing something like more than likely in like a business type of arena about like, are you legitimate before you have a logo? You know what I mean? If you don't have something people to like recognize you by, like, is anyone going to remember you? And I think that particularly for like the Black Lives Matter symbol and usage and whatnot, like I really think that it's become kind of like an unofficial logo, or maybe it is the official logo. I actually don't know. But I think that its movement through social media and through technology is what has made it possibly as poignant as the piece on top. Because as the Unite piece, because I think it's the Unite piece, it's created, it's in a very different way, you know what I mean? And it is one piece, and I'm sure prints of it were probably sold and different things. But I think the way that the imagery can move throughout like so many people's hands nowadays, I think has made art even more ingrained into our everyday lives. No, I think you're good. But I think
Stay focused, Lena.
But yeah, like I don't know. I really am thinking about also the way that art has been spread throughout these movements and how like that is a part of the movement itself. And I think social media and like especially like Black Lives Matter and like the original even Michael Brown like protesting and how it needed Twitter in order to be a thing. I think that imagery and like some of the photographs that have come from the recent protests, I think they're absolutely art in a very different way because they're also given some heft due to how they spread.
Oh, and yeah, we can move down to the second question too, because when I was writing that out, I mean, my generation is very, you know, active on social media and active on, I mean, I said videos and pictures and even like TikToks, because there's so many different social media apps that people are just using. And I mean, especially right after the protests happened in the end of May and June, like all social media was just filled with, you know, different propaganda and tweets and pictures of what was happening in videos. And there was so much information just being spread so much easier, I think in the 60s and 70s, like this art form and like spreading prints, that was a very like effective way to kind of like get the message out in like a clean, you know, little picture. But now we have just so much access to, I mean, different pieces, and people are making videos that spread awareness or like taking pictures at protests that, again, like you were saying, just kind of show they're a different form of art, but it's still like kind of cementing that time or that image just like in history. And so it's definitely very interesting to see how like we have kind of progressed to this different type of art that, I mean, I don't think lots of people would, or I'm sure there are quite a few people that consider like tweets or pictures taken or TikToks, like videos like that, forms of art. But I think, especially right now, or in the future, we'll be able to look back and realize like, oh, this is what we have to look back to, or this is what was happening. And it'll be those pictures and those videos that we'll kind of look back to. Does anyone else want to comment on these two, or do we want to move on for now?
So Lauren, one question that I have is, well, I do think that art and technology are now so tightly interwoven. You know, you can't have technology without the art. So, and of course, TikTok is a new form of art and technology merging. But I do have a question about this particular piece. Do you think, as someone who studies art, do you think this symbol, because symbols have so much meaning, and people, depending on who you are, you take a different meaning from it, right? So do you think this symbol, it's like the Confederate flag, you know, there are people who look at that and see something completely different from other groups, right? So do you think this symbol of the fist is universally perceived as something that is positive, or not?
I think that, or for me at least, in terms of what, and especially because like the fist, like looking at the comparison between the two pieces, how it's transgressed all that time, I think that it's not, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily positive or negative, but it kind of just invokes this feeling in you that they're, I mean, at least for me, it's like it invokes this feeling that like those are people demanding change, and which it can, you know, there can be so many different ways to like get that and work towards that. And so, and I guess not that I don't think that it's, because I think it's a negative in terms of like people, you know, having to use this or having to fight, and that's like a symbol for like, you know, a fight for change. And I think that, but I think that the symbol, at least, it really just invokes like a sense of kind of power and like change. It's like, that's when I see that, it's like, I know that this is like, you know, something serious, and this is like a fight for something. This isn't just, you know, so easy, and it can be gray. And I think that's, I think over time though, it will definitely still be seen as like a call to arms more than anything. I think so. I'm gonna move on to just the next ones that I have, the next pieces. Okay. So the next piece that I wanted to focus on is called Black First, America Second by David Hammons. This piece was also created in 1970. And so the medium he used was actually body print on screen and screen print on paper. And so it said it was 104.8 by 79.4 inches big, which is about 8 feet by 6 feet. And so I think he was influenced by a lot of different styles. And so I think the style I chose, or I thought that it most reflected, was kind of this postmodernist idea. But so I'll get into that. But first, I kind of just wanted to depict, so for the content or what he is trying to depict. So this piece depicts two different figures kind of from the profile, draped in this American flag. And although I read this article and it said that Hammons didn't really want to give specific meanings to, or like say this is what this piece means or this is what it's showing, he kind of wanted to let the audience decide that for themselves. This piece just by the title itself, you can tell that it's showing the double-sidedness of being Black in America, and just how oftentimes for Black Americans, they are discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And so there's this divide between being a Black American and then between being Black and being an American. Because oftentimes people judge you based on the color of your skin rather than your citizenship, to America. And so I think that's what he wanted to focus on. But the two figures in this picture both have different facial reactions. And so the bottom one could be speaking to just the pain and violence that is felt by discrimination, because he almost seems like he's crying out in anguish almost. And then the right one is a little more serious, and he's also holding the flag a little more, I said fondly, but a little more just tightly than the other figure is, which could be an attempt to like show this pride or connection to, being an American. But I read this article when I was looking over this piece, and it also said that while they are draped with the American flag, that could take on the meaning of them almost being protected by it, or it could take on the meaning of them almost being suffocated by it, and kind of what it represents and the history that it represents in America. And so the way that he made this piece was actually very interesting, because he used a screen print like the last artist, but he also used his own body and he kind of pressed it with oil and then pressed it on paper to create these figures. And so for Hammons, this piece is very personal, because that's himself reflected onto this paper, and he's engaged with this piece and was really just, I said there's like two different kind of forms to it, because his interaction in itself is a form of art, but then the piece itself is another form. And so he covered himself in grease and then pressed his different body parts against these pieces of paper, and then he would cover it with some dusted pigment, like he would layer it on. And although I said that his style was postmodernism, he used elements from the California funk movement, which was happening kind of in Northern California, and he was in LA around this time, and then postmodernism as well. And so the California funk art movement was represented through just how personal his pieces was and his experience with it. That movement really focused on kind of going back, or kind of straying from abstraction and kind of bringing it back to more subject matter and like a focus on a piece and making it more personal, rather than Jackson Pollock, where he would just flick paint. They wanted to kind of bring the focus back to one particular thing. And so it was personal in that it depicts him, but also his experience in America as well. And the postmodernist elements more came into play with his creation and the interaction that he had with the piece, because postmodernism was a lot of installation art and a lot of mixed media art, and it was a lot of combining a lot of just different things. And so by making the piece and displaying it, they were both, forms of art that play into this postmodernist idea. Hammond's function really in creating this piece, and like it says in the title, he wanted to depict what it is like to live Black in America, being Black and American, so Black first and America second, or American second. And so since the inception of this country, Blacks have been discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And although they were essential in creating and developing so many institutions of America and funding them with their labor, essentially, their forced labor. These institutions are filled with so much racism that hinder them from really being Americans first. Although, like, these figures were kind of draped in the flag, which represents all these ideals of freedom and the liberties that you should be granted as an American. Blacks in the 70s and at the inception, even now, don't have that same freedom. Although it might, they legally have it, they're not treated with the same liberties and the same freedom that the other white races are. And so this piece really creates a very interesting juxtaposition, because it shows that you can be both and how hard it is to be both and be an American, but being Black, you're not treated as such and feeling like an outsider in somewhere that you consider your home, and just how difficult that can be, just living that life. So, yeah. And so this piece was also being created in the 1970s. It was also found shelter in the Black Power movement, the Black arts movement, where the main concept of that time was really invoking racial pride and empowering just Black Americans. And at this time, Malcolm X and the not as much Malcolm X, but the Black Panthers were still enacting different pretty big actions. And so in 1970, they formed the Black Liberation Army, and then which led to the bombing of the South African consulate office. There was a Black Liberation Army, and then in 1971, the New York South African consulate office was bombed by the Black Revolutionary Assault Team, which was part of the Black Panthers, which was in protest to apartheid in South Africa. And so by 1972, one of the Black Panther leaders knew and shut down quite a few of the chapters in America of the Black Panther chapters. But still, during this time, Black nationalism was, very much being encouraged, and they were encouraging more so than anything just the empowerment of Blacks and Black communities socially, politically, and economically. And so for this one, I really just had the one question, because just the title and the picture itself really just interested me. And so I wanted to know what you guys kind of thought of the phrase Black first and America second. And when you hear that, what kind of comes to mind for you? So,
So I think this piece is really interesting to me, not just because of the title, but because of the actual piece itself. And as soon as you mentioned the title, The Black First, America Second, I thought American or America Second. It's American Second, right?
So I was looking it up, and I thought it was American, but it said America in different parts, and so I don't know, like different places said different things, and so I just figured I would say, but I do think it should be American, because just the way it's written out, like that makes more sense, I guess.
Yeah, but I do think it would be interesting, like if it was America Second, like there, because I think what I was gonna say is what I immediately thought of was there's this old newspaper article I think, but also just like the double V campaign, like after World War I and World War II, where Black soldiers come back and are basically like, you know, we need a victory at home, meaning a victory over racism and segregation and Jim Crow, and a victory abroad, because why in the world are we fighting for an American flag that like does not care if we're killed when we come back home? And so in that way, I do very much so kind of understand like this idea of Black first America or American second, because I think that historically, like kind of like what you pointed out, like the idea of an American person is not a Black person. The idea of an American citizen is not a Black person. And that is the way that Black people have been treated in this country for centuries at this point. And so also just the actual like art itself, like when you were talking about the two different forms, like treating the flag differently, I also am like, my first thought was that both of them are using the flag to cover their body, I'm assuming to cover their nudity, but one looks like he's almost doing it in, like you said, fondly or lovingly or caringly in a certain way. But the other one almost looks like it's like a, you know, gotta hide so you can, like, I don't even want to say shame, but just kind of that like, oh, I have to cover up. Like I have to, there is no like kind of care taken in that way. And I definitely think that the title is mirrored in also just the different representations here. And so, yeah, I think like as an African-American person, like Black first, America second, or American second, I don't know which one I want it to be, because I think it makes a very strong political point to say Black first, America second. I think it makes a strong like critique of identity in America to say Black first, American second. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if like the artist was like, yeah, it can be America or American. I'm gonna let you just kind of like, you know, figure it out on your own. But yeah, I'm interested to hear on what other people think about the title, but yeah.
Yeah, I looked it up and it looks like it's correct. So Lauren got it. I think most times when it's mentioned, it's America second. So it might be that commentary on, you know, the Vietnam War or World War II, you know, and African Americans discontent with the ways in which they were seen as second-class citizens after that. Yeah. Interesting title.
Yeah, I think for me, when I just reading that, it definitely just illustrates how we view Black Americans in our country, because even though we've had, you know, the civil, I was including something about, or I was gonna include a different question about like what the flag kind of represented, but like traditionally the flag's kind of been, you know, the symbol of freedom and the symbol of the fight we had for, you know, our liberties, that like we are awarded, you know, the all men are created equal. But, you know, for Black Americans that have been so discriminated in this country, that flag and that symbol, that doesn't really seem to like mean the same thing, because that's not the privileges and the rights that they've been treated with and awarded over time. Like they're simply not treated like they're Americans first. And that's hard when you live in a country where, you know, trying to show that you're still loyal and that you know, want to be here, but this country continues to, you know, treat you in such a way that you can't really even identify first with like this place that you are.
I think it's interesting to what you just said, Lauren, and which ties into what Yelena said earlier, which is, you know, that African Americans have not been seen as fully American. You know, they're always hyphenated, whether they're African American or Black American, that type of thing. And, you know, I have heard some critiques of this notion. And the critique is that, you know, why do you say that? You know, you should just feel like you're American. You shouldn't let other people define who you are. And yet, whether we're talking about pop culture or media or, you know, anything, when anyone thinks about, even African Americans, when we think about the notion of the all-American girl or the all-American boy, you know, and we kind of shut our eyes and think, what does that look like? We know what that looks like, right? That is something that has been sort of, again, it's a construct, right? So that has been constructed over many, many, many years. African Americans didn't construct that. It was constructed by the society. And so I always push back when people say, well, don't let anybody define you, because really Black people didn't do it. It was the society that created those definitions and those images. Yeah, so if I'm watching, for example, one of these silly dating shows on TV and they're like, oh yeah, Brad is like the all-American boy next door. You know, I know what Brad is gonna look like, you know, and Brad is not gonna be a brother, you know, so and you know, it's just, it kind of rolls off our tongues, you know, our consciousness. So this title is so telling and so, you know, pervasive and enduring. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to comment on this before we move on? Or is there anything in the chat? I don't even see the chat. We can come back to this because I think you can, you know, discuss this question for forever. But I'm going to go over the last piece that I have. So I'll move on to that one. So the last piece that I wanted to focus on was called Horn Players by Jean-Michel Basquiat. And so it's 3 different panels. And so the medium that he used was acrylic and oil paint stick on these 3 canvases. And this was made in 1983, and it's about 8 feet by 6 feet wide, big. And so his style was more of a neo kind of expressionism. And so for the form, or what artistic elements went into creating this, Basquiat focused on the neo-expressionist style, which, similar to what Barbara Jones was using, with the vivid colors, it was kind of these neo-expressionism used these vibrant, almost like non-realistic colors, and used a lot of rough, quick, and like jagged lines, which you could see in this. And it really allows for the artist to put his expressive capabilities and his expression into the piece itself and making it, because a lot of what goes into making this is the flow of your movements kind of create the flow of what is happening in the piece. And Basquiat himself had a fairly distinct style anyways, because he was a graffiti artist originally, and I mean, he still did graffiti, but that kind of led to him not really ever having like a horizon line, which is like kind of a plane of focus. And like in this piece, although it's 3 separate panels, there's really no sense of space. Like there is the lines that kind of separate it, but it all does look kind of jumbled together and on top of each other, which is also, there's not really, he didn't really use pride of place, which is when there's one thing central to the piece. There's, I mean, you could look at anything in this piece could kind of catch your eye to go look at. And then he didn't really use a sense of scale or like modeling. Basquiat really, being a graffiti artist before he kind of gained fame for his different pieces, and you know, pieces like The Horn Player, he really wanted to elevate graffiti into a fine art because he believed that it was still worthy of the same canvas as oil paint, but also like the same prestige that kind of came with paintings that were on canvas or, you know, used with oil. And so he saw it as a way to combine different phrases and different colors and kind of make this whole composition that could comment on topics like consumer society and social injustice. And so although a lot of his pieces might have looked, you know, messy and like there was a lot going on in that last one, there's still, he uses very specific images and words to bring a sense of realness to these somewhat jumbled pieces. And for Basquiat, he really wanted to create and promote these integral aspects of the African American community. And so in the piece, he's depicting two different jazz musicians, famous Black jazz musicians in America. And so he wanted to show the connection between the energy with jazz and graffiti, because again, like I was saying, with his style, it's kind of a flow of the movements and a lot of energy and improvisation and almost like a stream of consciousness way. And so he wanted to show it. He wanted to show that connection. And for this piece in particular, depicting these two Black jazz musicians, Basquiat wanted to show that although these, you know, musicians were applauded and, you know, everyone loved them, that didn't mean that they didn't face the same, you know, challenges as other marginalized Black men in America, and that oftentimes people could really like art and really, or like music and like how it sounds, but you can still just have this unnecessary hatred or unnecessary, you know, racism towards the person that created it simply because, you know, of the color of their skin. And so the content in this piece in particular, so on the left is a portrait of the famous jazz musician Charlie Parker. And the reason orthonology, like the term orthonology, is kind of spread throughout the whole piece is that it was that's the study of birds, and his nickname was Bird. But it was also the name of one of the jazz standards that he created while he was a musician. And so that's really what takes up most of the left panel. And then the center is more just a lot of doodling, wordplay. He writes the name Dizzy Gillespie, who's in the next panel, but it's a lot of, and Charlie Parker's name is below, and it's just a lot of, you know, stream of consciousness type of doodling, where it's just kind of, you know, writing stuff down or drawing this Skeletor-like head and just illustrating, you know, abstraction and the breakdown of the human body. And then in the right one was the portrait of Dizzy Gillespie. And so again, he repeats the phrase orthonology and uses a similar type of abstraction to create both of these figures, but although they're not like, the instruments aren't colored in or like the figures aren't necessarily fully completed, you could still tell like what is happening. And that really is from his abstract kind of neo-expressionist style. And so contextually, so Basquiat was discovered in 1981 as a graffiti artist, and before he was discovered, he was actually homeless for some time. And in the 1980s, America saw a very drastic increase in the amount of Americans living below the poverty line. And this increase was caused by declining personal incomes and loss of affordable housing, and just like welfare cuts, and even just personal problems that like put them more at risk to Americans to fall into homelessness. In terms of race relations at this time, in 1980, race riots erupted in Miami, Florida, and they began after 4 gay police officers were accused or acquitted regarding the death of Arthur McDuffie. And so essentially, Arthur McDuffie was this Black man that was riding his motorcycle through Miami or through Dade County. And it was said he was pulled over, and it said that he was going, there was a high-speed chase for a few minutes, and then it said that he was going 80 and that he crashed his bike. But when they had the medical examination, it was actually, he had about like 10 different cuts and like bruises essentially to his head that weren't consistent with a motorcycle accident. And so people essentially thought that it was just due to police brutality. And so a protest occurred in downtown Miami at the Justice Building, and about 5,000 people showed up to protest originally, but by 6 p.m. it turned into a riot, and it lasted for about 3 days. And by the end, 18 people were killed, 350 were injured, and 600 were arrested. And so the third day, there was an 8 p.m. curfew, a temporary liquor and firearms ban, and the presence of 3,500 National Guardsmen. And so, especially what's, happening now with just regards to the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that are happening now, and especially what's happening in Portland where there's so many National Guardsmen, I think, this was important. And so the reactions just for then and now, a few years after Basquiat created this piece, he created a piece to commemorate the death of a Black artist named Michael Stewart, who died at the hands of the police. Essentially, he was tagging a wall in a New York subway station, and the police arrested him, handcuffed him, and then he later died from cardiac arrest while in comatose. But he was being before he was taken into custody, and I mean they handcuffed him to his hospital bed where he was already in a coma. And so for Basquiat, him creating this piece was because he was drawn to Michael Stewart simply because Basquiat felt that very easily could have been him, and that they could have shared the same fate. And so, although it's not this same piece, I think it shows that, even artists like Basquiat, even, musicians, you admire them so much for their work, but simply because of, the racism in America, they can die so easily just, and especially at the hands of police. And so the questions I have for this one is just, because Basquiat he made this piece commemorating Michael Stewart, and he kind of preserved his life in this piece and in this work to commemorate him. I wanted to ask how current social media has kind of worked to preserve the life and the pictures of the people that we have that have lost their lives to police. And so I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that now.
Actually, I just recently found a really awesome artist on Instagram that does drawings of people that have lost their life to police brutality, and then only colors in the drawing like 1 minute for every year that they were alive. And so like you have people ranging from George Floyd, so like not old obviously, but older, all the way to the young girl that, like the child, she was 7 or 8, that was killed in her bed by police during a raid or whatnot. And it's just been especially poignant to watch because the artist does them in the order that like people bring the case to his attention. And so there are of course the big name ones, and then there are names that I didn't know because local people have petitioned him to like do the art. But I think it's interesting because not only does it preserve the memory, it also does definitively have like a political aspect to it, in that it is meant to inspire a type of emotional reaction to like the pictures that you see that are mostly black and white, because he only had seven. Yes, exactly, Emily. Instagram handle is @AB. And like it's meant to, when you see pictures of a child that only is mostly black and white because they don't have, he only has 7 minutes to color in their face. I don't know, it really hits. And so that was the first thing I thought of when you asked that question.
Yeah, I've seen those pictures as well, and when they do just the time lapse, and it's just looking at that, and I think it really goes to show like that's how much life that they had. You know, these young kids that were killed at the hand of the police, like they had this little drawing, little experience with life, and then it was cut off. And so I think it's definitely very, very poignant, very telling. Does anyone else want to say anything?
I think I hadn't heard about that artist, so I'm gonna look them up. Make a note. But of course, I've heard very much about Basquiat. I think that the social media, your question about how does social media today work to preserve the life and pictures of those that have lost their lives, apart from the artists that Lena just mentioned. I do think that there's something to be said about the starkness of how social media is preserving these deaths or reporting these deaths versus a piece like Basquiat's piece, which is sort of interpretive and gives you an out, kind of, right? And so I think that actually this question is connected to your second question, which is a great question as well, about how people's quote unquote color blindness I mean, a lot of white people loved Basquiat. You know, they just thought he was the cat's whiskers. He was discovered by Andy Warhol. You know, he was the darling of a certain group of society, right? A certain strata of society. But today, these social media preservations of Black death don't give you that out. Like you have to confront it. I'm reminded here of, there's this, I have to go soon because I have a meeting, but this is so good. There's a Black country artist called Mickey Guyton, who, you know, she's a country singer. She's African American, does well. Country audience loves her. Until about a couple of weeks ago, she released a song called Black Like Me. And the backlash that she has gotten. She's about to get Dixie chicked, right? Which is that she's about to be canceled, because up to that point she was okay. They said, you know, they felt she was fine. The color blindness thing was alive and well. And then she released this song called Black Like Me, which they are very upset about. They were like, why can't you just be a woman? Why do you have to identify as a Black woman? And so I think this color blindness is very dangerous, you know, and it gives people a sense of what they want to see and what they don't want to see, which is also very problematic and really dangerous. All right, Lauren, I'm sorry, I have to run off, but excellent job as always. Thanks, Lena, for hosting.
So yeah, and then we can go into, if we want to talk a little bit before time runs out, kind of just how color blindness kind of affects people's abilities to absorb these messages, or like she was saying, that song, or not, there affects their ability to not absorb these messages almost, or the circumstances that went into a piece, you know, by an artist that the piece they might love, but they haven't realized that how these people how Blacks have been treated in America, and how that so much of that and their experience goes behind creating these pieces. And so I think for me, at least, color blindness, and I mean, the movie, you know, The Green Book, which is kind of, it can take on like the white savior lens, but there's so many different scenes where this Black pianist is going to these different cities and these different places in the South, and you know, people want to hear him, they love to hear him, but then he can't even eat in the same, you know, places as the rest of his band, or he has to go in or change in this, you know, broom closet. Like, he doesn't have a dressing room, but people so deeply admire, you know, his work and his just piano skills, but still people, I think especially white people, can be colorblind to the fact that like they might love what this person is producing, but they're not really respecting almost like what this person has had to go through to create this, or what has molded them to creating this.
Yeah, going off what you said, Lauren, I think people claim colorblindness as a, like, because they see it as a way to kind of exempt themselves from like the racism that is ingrained in their lives, but it's really just like a way for them to ignore the intersectionality that goes into these people's identities, and you can't just like recognize them for being a woman. Like, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but like the woman who just left, you can't like just recognize certain parts of someone's identity because they all intersect and make them unique, and like defines, or not defines, but the intersectionality, like there's so many different facets of someone's identity that contributes to their privilege or discrimination. And so people just kind of claim colorblindness as a way to ignore that, when you really can't just like ignore certain parts and then acknowledge other parts that you like. Yeah, and then also going up to the first question, just quickly, I think social media is kind of like a double-edged sword now, because you can so clearly, or it's so easy to like recognize the people who have lost lives, and you are confronted with it straight on, but also people kind of take it to an inappropriate level, I think. Like especially on TikTok and stuff like that, where people are like dancing to things like that and kind of making a meme out of it. And so I think it's a double-edged sword in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Emily especially about the social media thing, because I think like recently, the past couple of like, I'd say the past week or two, people have been very clear, like making tweets and Instagram posts that are like, stop using like Brianna's name as a meme. You know what I mean? Like, this shouldn't be like a catchy phrase you say after something, or like your caption on a selfie. Like, it's meant to actually like bring justice, not like so that your selfie pops up on, you know, a search for the hashtag. I also think Emily and Dr. Shonikan's points about colorblindness and whatnot, I think are very, very poignant. I think also what colorblindness does, and then I'm glad you pointed out, Lauren, was like, it does affect the ability to actually see the message. I would say to see the message, let alone absorb it. Like, I'm quite sure that the Black country singer that Shonikan was talking about had probably made some references to being Black and, you know, a country singer or from the South, like at other points. But as long as those that are listening to her are not looking for Blackness, are only looking for country music because they're quote unquote colorblind, they're not gonna get the message. You know what I mean? So then she has to be more in their face and have a song like Black Like Me, you know what I mean? And I think that, like, I don't know, I think that oftentimes what happens specifically with art, with of different forms, with music, with anything like that, is that when it is a Black creator behind it, it's very difficult, in my opinion, to separate the creator's Blackness and lived experience from the work. But I think, especially with art, people try to, and they want to say, well, it's good because I'm giving them, you know, credit for their talent, not for their race. But at the same time, like, their talent is informed by their race. It's informed by what they've experienced. And so I think, like, to answer your second message, I think the way I see it is that, like, this ridiculous notion of color blindness completely negates the possibility of seeing the message, let alone being able to absorb it, articulate it, and discuss it. So yeah.
No, yeah, and I think with just the color blindness too, and I was gonna include one of these questions, it's that it's almost, you know, Black artists and even musicians, like, just in general, so many of them have to create art or create songs that speak to their experience as a Black American, or just, you know, not even American, but, you know, just Black in general, because that molds, you know, that is what they experience so often, that molds what they are. But it's like, you know, you could have gone through art by white artists at this same time and it would have just been like, you know, oh, like, here's a flower, like, here's like just a portrait of a woman, because like they have the freedom to, you know, create those pieces and still receive that same sense of, I don't know, not prestige, but just like that same sense of like respect. Whereas these Black artists, and like Basquiat, like, people admire his work so much, but it's like he has to put, and so many artists, they have to put so much of their personal selves into like creating these pieces and tell of their experience to just almost like get the attention of the audience. Like, and so, and yeah, and I agree with what Emily was saying just about how social media can be a double-edged sword, because I think it's good that, like, we have, you know, we're preserving people's names and their images, but I think it also can be slightly harmful when, you know, I mean, there's video documentation of, like, with George Floyd, there was the entire video, like, depicting the police violence, and although it holds people accountable, it's also, it almost desensitizes, you know, just everyone in general, because it's, and when you see other videos of, you know, Black Americans experience the same violence, although you're like, oh my God, like, this is horrible, or even other Black Americans are like, yeah, that's my reality, but it's like, you're almost desensitizing people to it by putting it on social media and like spreading videos, and you can potentially, like, you know, trigger people by like posting those videos, because I mean, they're informative, but they can be just harmful to people's, you know, just mental health almost. And I mean, I think that they can be informative, but I think we have to like be careful before we let too many of those videos kind of show and go through circulation and then be like go right back out because we're desensitized to like what is happening. Well, I think we're essentially, we went from 11 to 12 and we're a little over 12. So I'm going to start wrapping it up now, but I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything real quick before we go, or just thank you all for coming, whoever's still even here.
Thank you for hosting and informing us.
Yes, you're doing great.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's it for right now. I'll have Yelena knows, but for Emily and Noel, I have another one in August, so I'll give you guys that information if you want to come to that one as well.
Yes, definitely send me the link once you have it.
Yeah, also, all the sessions are being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to make it to the first session and you want to like do a super catch up before the third, you can absolutely do that too. And yeah, great job, Lauren. This has been awesome. Introduced at least me to some pieces that I didn't know existed. So really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.